All right. In this week's episode, it will just be Luke and myself. Chelsea is out, and we will be revisiting a story from episode 54. So if you haven't listened to episode 54 and you like this episode, head on back and listen to part 1. And I'll let Luke take it away from here.
Okay, so we're going to pick this story up. So this story was written by Mark, a man who put into words his experience within marriage, divorce, and infidelity, and is as told by him. This is my story. I won't pretend to speak for others. These are my thoughts, feelings, and choices that led me down unexpected paths. My affair ended several years ago, but I'm reminded daily of the many ways it changed my life forever. Pulled in two directions. I lived between two choices. I could end the affair and try to salvage my marriage, or I could end my marriage to Anne and try to build a new life with Linda. I was not a helpless victim. My turmoil was a consequence of the choices that I had made. But regardless of how I got here, I found myself in a place where I was constantly being pulled in two directions. Trying to hold on to Linda and my family at the same time couldn't work. They were moving in opposite directions. I knew I'd eventually have to make a choice, but I didn't want to face the pain of letting go of either one. In my indecision, I began to lose both. The split between Anne and me continued to widen and deepen until it became a chasm. We tried to cross it. Anne took tentative steps, and so did I, but never at the same time. It seemed that whenever one of us was reaching, the other was pushing away. Linda, who had always encouraged me to be more hopeful about our chance of a life together, began to doubt that I would ever be able to make a commitment to her. We started talking more about what her life might look like without me. For months, we discussed this and finally concluded that we should stop seeing each other. One afternoon, we said our goodbyes and then she left. There was a feeling of finality that had never been there before. I searched through all my possessions, gathered up every reminder of Linda, pictures, letters, cards, keys, gifts, and drove to Applebee's where I threw them into the trash bin. This was not an act of anger, but a sorrowful resolution. I believed my best hope for moving past the loss of Linda was to let go of everything that I had that had been a link to her. Our favourite stories tend to be the ones where we get what we wished for. I danced between two desires and I lost both of them. Linda was gone and Anne filed for divorce. A couple more futile attempts were made at rescuing our marriage, but they didn't work. She blamed me, I blamed her, the attorneys did their thing. Our marriage was over, not a happy ending. But I'd made my choices. Now, I had to find a way to move on. Even if I was dragging along a bit of an old bag full of unresolved issues. And so I did, until a seemingly normal event delivered a blow that stopped me dead in my tracks. We usually have to be hurt before we can be healed. My children, my brokenness. My affair confused and hurt them. I became a father so different from the one they'd always known. When I first became a father, I couldn't stop imagining what life with my daughter would be like. I wondered how we would share the important moments, first steps, first words, first days at school, boyfriends, birthdays, holidays, family vacations, driving, graduation, wedding. The celebration of her 16th birthday wasn't quite what I imagined. I sat in a house that wasn't my home and tried to ignore the uncomfortableness of being in a room with former friends and in-laws. Normally, I would have been fully engaged in such a special event, injecting my own mix of creativity and surprises to create a special memory for my daughter. My responsibility this year was to bring the chips. I left the party, but couldn't shake the feeling of loss and regret that had settled in me. As I drove home, I began to cry. It was nearly an hour before I could maintain even a little control. I reached for my phone and called Anne. Between sobs, I managed to tell her how sorry I was for the promises I'd broken, for the lies that I had told, for the pain I had caused. My sorrow was genuine, coming from a deeper place than it had ever come before. Anne needed to be a witness to it. I knew it would help her in her healing. This brokenness did not restore our marriage. Our lives and circumstances had separated enough to prohibit that, but it did clear the way for us to begin treating each other with respect and even a kind of love again. We are both remarried now, but we enjoy a kind of unique friendship that I value. The pain of the affair and divorce will never be completely gone, but grace is able to cover so much. What are your thoughts?
Remember when I found this story, thinking about how many people end up in that situation where they're pulled in the two directions, and in their indecision, neither relationship ends up being the relationship.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that was really relatable.
So much. And I think this applies to pretty much every multiple choice that we find ourselves with, where we sit in this place of indecision, like we haven't made a decision. But of course, by not making a decision, that is in fact making a decision. We're choosing not to choose. And in doing so, we let go of both things. It's almost like the definition of being disempowered, but like you're disempowering yourself by not giving yourself the permission to choose the thing that's most important to you. And okay, maybe there's a complex set of rules in your mind about why something is more important than the other. It's that head versus heart. This is what makes sense. This is what society tells me. This is what I thought I'd signed up for. Yet there's this other part of me that's longing for something else. But when those things are taken away, and all of a sudden you're in this back and forth between, and you can't pay attention to either. And I think humans in general, it's interesting. I think about my partner, and many women in my life actually will tell me that they are masters of multitasking, and I'm not having any of it. I don't believe in multitasking. I just believe that some people are better at jumping from one thing to another and then back to the first thing again. Like, you can only ultimately focus on one thing at a time, like effectively. Like, you can only give your actual attention to one thing at a time. And by definition, when you put your attention on one thing, you are deducting your attention to everything else. So whereby you're in a situation where you feel like there are multiple choices, then all you're doing is just flipping from one to another. Neither of them get the love, the attention, the space, the desire, all of the things that are needed ultimately to help a relationship, in this case, flourish or succeed or be repaired. It's warming to read that despite all of that, that a good communicative relationship has managed to exist between the writer and his ex-wife, despite the fact that they've taken these separate paths.
Yeah. And I feel like that's not an uncommon story to stumble upon, where even when something as catastrophic as infidelity is the reason for the deterioration of the marriage, that realization over time that there was something that wasn't working within that relationship, but that if you're compassionately and kid forward in your co-parenting experience, I think that leaves this window open for
Without doubt.
really healthy co-parenting relationships. And anybody who has to be in that close of contact, that's where like a unique type of friendship would flourish, like in his situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I can relate to this very closely to my own situation. This is literally, at least the first part's very similar in the sense that we separated and divorced, and the children or at least the role of co-parenting became a real priority. That was something that we both individually really focused on, and that helped maintain and form and, I suppose, distract to some extent. It would have been very easy to just pay attention to all of the pain and the hurt and the deception and everything that encompassed. Like, it'd be very easy to do that and then become very bitter and resentful and angry and almost allow the situation to define me in some way. But by having that slight shift in in perspective and aiming at something just adjacent, still very closely linked, but just adjacent, which was my role as a parent, my role as a father, and then my role as a co-parent. That I think allowed a space for a friendship to be maintained initially, and then, as it happens, to flourish in a different way further down the line, which could never have happened if it had just been driven by bitterness and anger and resentment. And despite the difficult situation that the writer finds himself in, or found himself in at this stage, the priorities ultimately were that it seems that the love and the emotions that he felt were for both people, even if in slightly different capacities. And that, I can almost imagine that visceral feeling of being torn apart. And when you think of that contest being pulled in two directions, I can almost imagine it feels like my chest is literally being ripped open in that situation. And I am only imagining, of course, but
it's when you try to set aside, I heard somebody say something along the lines of setting aside logic and practicality. So if you can put in, when he was in that moment of being torn between one or the other, it was clearly the head logicking out the family, the promises, the original marriage, to the heart's desire for something that he was receiving in that other relationship.
yeah.
And yeah, it's a tightrope. And if you
It
stay
is a
on it
tight,
long enough.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting when you think about we often give the emphasis to the other person to make you feel a certain way. Like, it's like we hand that responsibility to this other person. And maybe it is our spouse, maybe it is the affair partner, maybe it is somebody else. It doesn't really matter. The point is, we hand that feeling that we have, is our feeling of love and desire and connection. And all. It's like we are the only people feeling it. Like, nobody else feels what we feel. I can be in love with another person, but what I feel is unique and different and individual to what they feel. And besides which, my feelings of love towards that person, desire, are based on how I think about it. It's based on what I'm making it mean to me, like why it's important to me. It's not necessarily objectively the other person that is creating the feeling. They're just existing. And for me, based on how I see them and what stories I tell myself and what meaning, that's what creates that emotion. It's not the other person creating the emotion. And I think sometimes we can find ourselves in a situation where one person, one friend, one partner, whatever it is, can seem like they have the thing, whatever it is. And in turn, we can turn away from our own responsibility for seeking that feeling of love and desire and connection from within ourselves towards anybody. That's always the option. Of course, when we're in that place where we are torn between two decisions, we can't pay attention to one any more than the other because we're always back and forth. So the affair partner may have represented something that was very offered that heart, where the logic doesn't work. And the logic doesn't work in that situation. You can't out logic emotion as much as we try.
As much as we try.
And we do try. You can't out logic it. They can work together really effectively, but one can't overpower. Actually, one can overpower the other, but it's not logic that wins.
Yeah, it's not usually logic. Definitely not. Yeah, and another really interesting portion was when he goes into discussing the fallout with his children and realizing how it changed the whole dynamic for the rest of at least the child raising years.
Yeah.
And I remember in the early part of the story, he talked about apologizing and he wasn't able to really feel like the loss. Here, where does he talk about it? Where he calls,
not acknowledging his own grief or something, was it?
Yes. So when he left the party, but couldn't shake the feeling of loss and regret that had settled in him. The fact that it took him to this point, this was the moment that he was finally able to feel that grief. And then that's probably how his ability to then call his wife and have her witness him in this moment of vulnerability is probably a huge reason why their friendship was able to start in a new dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe also maybe prior to that, his either unwillingness or inability or whatever that looks like, to communicate in such an authentic, genuine, like from the heart, from the emotion, maybe that is one of the things that actually impacted their relationship prior to this. And it's almost
good chance.
Yeah. And that's often, again, stereotypical guy. I don't, Chelsea will be jumping on me for pigeonholing people, and I'm not pigeonholing people. I'm just, as a guy, I feel like I can fairly safely say that based on my own personal experience and that of many people that I've met over my life, it's not uncommon for guys to bury their emotions and to not really truly listen to what's going on because we want to solve the problem. We out logic everything, or at least we try our hardest. And to a point, you can do that, to a point. But sometimes, particularly when other people are involved, particularly when there's complicated relationships, and particularly when there's complicated emotions, you can't, there's no way around a negative emotion. You can't hide from it. It'll always be there. And so it's, okay, we accept it, we welcome it along the journey. And that's what he does in this moment. He's reflecting on the situation. It's not how he planned. It's not what he'd foreseen. The relationship with him and his daughter wasn't what he had hoped it would be, or at least it had not laid out in the way that he thought. And this has left this deep sense of loss and this deep sense of grief of what might have been, or what he perceived he thought he would have. And it's only when he truly acknowledged that he's able to communicate it, or at least this is how it sounds, communicate it with, which, yeah, absolutely just like reinforces the foundation of their friendship as a whole. And their roles as maybe friends and co-parents moving forward. It's by being vulnerable that they're given that option.
Yeah. And I think that grief hits you when you least expect it. And it's so easy to attach yourself to a future that you only ever imagined. And so in that moment, he was just the guy who was bringing the chips.
Yeah.
And that was what brought him to his rock bottom, to finally embrace the grief and to finally push through it. But at the end of the whole, when you look at it as a whole, they ended up remarried. They ended up...
Did I read that? And not? Oh, no, so they remarried separately.
They're both remarried now. Yeah, it's not
not together. I was like, what, did I miss that?
But they're both remarried and they enjoy a unique form of friendship as co-parents, as exes. And I think it was like James Sexton who had a comment. He'd made a comment about how he was a horrible husband, but he was a great ex-husband. And I think if you give yourself like the grace to just accept a new role, I think that happens more often than we tend to focus a lens, especially online, on the bad, on the negative.
Oh, without doubt.
And we don't shine enough lights on the people that it ends up being a good experience.
Definitely. And because you're right, it's like we're inbuilt with a negative bias. And it makes sense. We want to avoid danger. So we become hyper alert of looking out for anything that could be a potential risk, a potential threat of any concerns. And really that's kind of anything that's negative. It's like that, the brain perceives it that way. It's not really thinking about the reality of the situation. It's just, let's draw our attention to something that's negative. And then we can space ourselves safely or appropriately. Like we can then navigate the relationship between ourselves and that thing, whether it be some angry person or some event that's happened on the news or whatever. It feels like we can navigate with it because our relationship with negative is so strong, it's inbuilt. Because you can only become so dead. That's it. Like it's got a definitive point. Whereas like in the other direction, there's no limit. There's a positive and excitement and joy. There's no cap. It's just subjective. It's like, how high do you want to go? Whereas the other direction has got there is a very definitive, like once you cross this threshold, you don't come back kind of thing. And so it kind of makes sense. But Where the danger of that is it puts us into groups, it pigeonholes, it does categorize, it compartmentalizes, and it really, again, tries to apply logic to a situation that's really about emotion. And then when we try, it's almost like talking two different languages, you know? We've got solution focused, rigid, like flow charts, make sense. And then we've got feelings, which is actually most of us. It's basically neck down, It's like experience the world. Anybody, for you, for me, for anybody who's listening, it's like we are all feeling, like right now, we're all feeling something. Maybe it's intrigue, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's excitement, maybe it's curiosity. But there's some feeling and emotion that exists within you right now. That's literally what Alive is being about. It's about navigating that. And I think the more that we can start to connect with that and understand it, then the more power it gives us as individuals. And I think even though this realization, it might not have been as explicit in the moment when he made this call to his ex-wife or his ex-partner, to Anne in this case, that was him connecting from that emotional part. That was the bit that was needed. And it's interesting, we often refer to this as rock bottom. And it's not, someone shared with me recently, I can't even remember exactly who it was now, so I apologize, but it's rather than you becoming version 1.0 or version 2.0 or version 3.0, if anything, you're trying to strip it back down. You're trying to get back to version 0.0. You're trying to peel off all the layers that have weighed you down over the course of your life, all the stories, all of the expectations, all of the societal expectations. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to unpick those layers and get you back to a start point. And sometimes I think that's in some ways like the equivalent of what we might interpret as rock bottom. It's like you need to get there first, and then you can start to grow and build back up and create what your new narrative, your new life looks like, which is...
Yeah, it's that idea of unbecoming. It's like unbecoming all of the things you've picked up since you were a child. And maybe you picked it up through the church. Maybe you picked it up through the military. But all of these external factors have created this version of you. And I feel like then you become an adult and then you keep trying to conform for at least your 20s, sometimes your 30s. But there's always these people that are like, I wouldn't trade my 30s or my 40s for nothing. And I think those are the people that figured out that unbecoming is actually like a whole step to then come into your like authentic self. And then life gets a lot more fun once you're moving through life with your own intuition, making your own decisions, and prepared to basically back any decision that you make. You can start making decisions just that much easier.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing it from an authentic place and you're not trying to figure out what the other person wants and match, that's when life becomes a lot easier.
If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer.
Bizarrely, I was delivering an in-person workshop today on trust, and I was having a conversation with a group of guys. We were talking about trust being, it's easy to perceive it as being like the responsibility of the person that you are trusting, i.e. that is how trustworthy that individual is. And one of the questions I always ask during these sessions is, I've usually been speaking for half an hour or so, and I'm like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust me? And 10 being you trust me with your life, and 1, you wouldn't trust me with a barge pole. And they all call out numbers. And of course, these numbers vary hugely. I used to get a range from 2 to 8. And I'm quite proud. Not that long ago, I got -10. Which I thought, oh, well, I've made an impression. Anyway, the point is the numbers, it doesn't matter in that sense. What we're highlighting here is that the numbers are different. yeah, in this particular setting, I've been stood there, I've been talking to the same group of people. They've all heard me say the same words. I've introduced myself, talking about the concept of trust, etc. And yet they all have a different opinion of how much they trust me. And it really highlights that part of us that trust is always about our ability to trust. It's our choice to trust way more than the trustworthiness as the subjective thing as the other person. Because I could show up consistently for 10 different people and they could all offer me maybe tell me a secret, for example, and I might keep that secret and honor that. However, the level of trust that they're giving me going forward is still going to be different amongst them all. That doesn't then just apply a definitive amount of trust, because it's about their capacity or their willingness to have faith in their own decision, their own choice to trust me or their partner or whoever it be. And I think once you can truly trust yourself, it's only then really that you can even consider like extending that out. And so talking about it, sort of linking loosely to what you were talking about, that it is this, that is once you find that inner peace, that inner confidence, that you're aware of your self-worth and you can trust your own judgment, then you can really like fully, truly take advantage of the relationships that exist in the world, where you don't need to people please. You don't need to be changing who you are based on the other people. Like you're not having to show up in a way that is inauthentic, that's not aligned with your values, just so that in the hope that somebody else might feel better, or maybe that they won't get angry or they won't get upset. And we see so many relationships break down as a consequence of one person really not honoring their own boundaries and not honoring their own core values in favor or ultimately in favor of trying to satisfy their partner. And of course, it never does satisfy their partner. And ultimately, it still ends up in a breakdown of relationship. And yeah, so finding that true self, I think it's probably why meditation's it's been going around for thousands of years. It's like it's bringing yourself back to the present. It's making you aware of what's going on right now, in this very moment.
And what's in your control, which is you. And I think your ability, how much you can trust somebody, is going to depend on your experiences. And so how much work have you done to acknowledge that the experience was in the past and that you have more control now than you had then? If you haven't done that internal work, then yeah, your trust level is going to be low, because you're going to be able to go off and list all of the people that broke your trust in your head. And that's how you're deciding how much you can trust a person.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think that is one of I've talked to multiple people who are like, I've been cheated on multiple times. And then I'll dig sometimes and be like, do you think that how you treated your current partner was affected by the betrayals of your past? Because if you come into the relationship guarded and you don't even realize you're guarded, then that emotional intimacy is going to lack. And so if there's something that is external to you, but it continues to happen to you, it's a pattern. And in my opinion, it's a pattern that the universe is trying to get you to recognize. And it's so easy to say, they're doing it to me, I'm not playing a role. But at a certain point, if you start to dig around, you can usually find that you played a hand in some way or another.
Of course, you have to have done. And like you say, if you're looking at the relationship with your guard up, then it is going to impact how you show up. And therefore, you are not living in line with your true self in that moment. So you don't feel relaxed, you don't feel comfortable. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't protect ourselves if we feel that we are, in danger in some way, shape, or form. But when we take a past experience and apply it to a future situation, those two situations are very different, but yet we're using the same set of rules. And then it's hardly surprising that we do see these patterns where somebody can have these repeated situations like they've been cheated on multiple times. And it doesn't make it their fault. And I really feel that's important to highlight, is it doesn't make it your fault. But what you can do is you can reflect on how you show up and how you want to show up. and what's important to you. And so what boundaries are you letting slip? And do you want to try and do something about that? Is that something you can't force or control the behavior of your partner? You can't do that. You can never do that. And even if you are the perfect person and you've got relationships down to a T, it still doesn't stop people potentially from being unfaithful. Like that doesn't happen. But you can influence and you can impact and you can stand for what's important to you, and you can put boundaries in place and you can follow through on those boundaries and make sure that you are both being real and authentic, but also protected and safe all at the same time. But you've got your own back. Ultimately, you have your own back.
And when you do that self-work, it is so scary, in my opinion, when I started it, but the amount of powerlessness that was eliminated through the realization, this is where I was holding back. This is where I played a role in our relationship deteriorating. The hard part is that both of the people have to do the work. Then the other person has to come back and say, this is where I came in. This was my history. This is where I was guarded. And if you don't have both people, like he talks about how they were never doing it at the same time, that is something that really resonated with me from my marriage, is it was just never aligning. Like we were never working at the same time. And when you're not, that's just, it takes a partnership, takes that level of communication.
Yeah, and communication is the key thing in that situation. It's communicating what you're experiencing, but also, and arguably to some extent, at least equally important, that you are giving space to allow your partner to communicate what they're experiencing. And you can't force that. All you can do is offer them the space to do so. And when you truly do offer the space for someone to share, for your partner, you ask them a question, you become genuinely curious. It can be quite surprising what they'll say. But we get into situations in relationships where we're always predicting what it is that our partners will say or how they'll react. So we don't go there because we've already decided what the outcome is. But then we've created a situation where that is the only possible outcome. Or it's
especially these really long-term marriages and these long-term relationships where I know exactly what he's going to say because he said it 5 times. And then meanwhile, he's over there. She's already decided my opinion on this because she doesn't let the past go. I'm not going to bother to say anything. And again, It's communication.
Yeah.
But both people have to go and be like, oh, I'm not giving you space to authentically respond because I'm reaching from my past experience.
And it's interesting, like we can think about the ideas of communication in terms of what's a good way to effectively communicate. And I'm sure I could help somebody put in a structure to do that. However, I used to work for a company and it was a small family-run company. It's husband and wife. And honestly, these two, they argued like I've never known any other pair of human beings argue. And I think at the time that I left the company, they'd been married for 50 years or thereabouts. So they'd been together for a very long time. And it was interesting. I always used to make this observation that the only reason that they're still together is because neither of them listen to each other. And it's strange because to some extent that was true. They'd both back and forth shout at each other and they'd both lose their temper and get angry. But neither of them was actually shutting the other one down. And that was the thing that I noticed. Like they were both able to at least express what they needed in that moment, even if it was not really being received in the way that maybe they'd hoped it would be. It didn't matter. It was the fact that they were actually being able to express what they were thinking and feeling without being squashed, without being saying, no, you don't get to say what you think. You don't get to say what you feel. Like that didn't exist. Now, I'm not saying it was the perfect communication style, don't get me wrong, but it was really interesting how despite what seemed like no communication, because it didn't seem like either of them were listening to each other, just like two people going crazy at each other, 2 kids almost, or 2 animals, 2 dogs barking. But then it would subside and they'd be fine. And they'd been together for years. And honestly, at least from the outside, with the exceptions of the arguments, they seemed really happy. Like, it was just such a strange dynamic. But I think it was simply because they were holding, not necessarily willingly, but they were allowing the other to express, which is the equivalent of holding space and giving them room to emote.
Yeah. And being able to express, that's like a huge thing. Like the amount of times that I just had to get something out and I didn't need a response. Like they even say, like, when your partner is off, you should ask them, do you want an ear or do you want a solution, or do you just want a hug? Do you want to talk? Do you want a solution-oriented response, or do you just want a hug? Like being able to, and in that situation, they both just needed to get it out there.
And again, this is also making me think of another situation with me and my partner. There'd been a time in the past, I remember years ago, we're both runners, and we'd run this particular race, and it had been one of the first ones that I'd done. She was already been running quite a lot. And she'd said that she was going to run with me. Like, she'd stay with me for the whole thing. I think it was my first 10K. And we got to probably about the 8-kilometer mark. And this other guy that she knew from the running club came past, and she got chatting with him. And then he sped up a bit, and I was tiring and fatiguing. And she went off with him. And it got to the finish line. And I was furious inside. I was like, you'd said that you were going to stick with me. But I didn't actually tell her what I thought. I just went in a mood. I just like thinking about it now, like a petulant child, in all honesty, having a bit of an adult tantrum is really what was happening. Anyway, then much later, years later, maybe last year even, I can't remember, and we'd done another race together. And as it also happened that she was running with me. And again, we'd got to this point where we'd agreed that we were going to run together. I'd probably gone a little bit faster in the first half than I'd really hoped to have done. And then I got in my own head, and then again got to about the 8-kilometer mark, and I was feeling like I couldn't really do it. And she was able to just go really easily. Yet the whole time prior to this, she'd been saying about how, oh no, you'll beat me by miles, And I was like, no, there's no way, you're way fitter than me at the minute. I look at our training times, there's no question that you'll beat me. But she was like completely in denial about the possibility that I could beat her, that she could beat me. And yet she beat me by miles. And I got to the finish line and got through the finish line. And again, I was feeling this internal frustration. Why won't she listen? And then I went up to her and I said, look, just for a minute, I'm just going to have to say something. And I verbally expelled all of my frustration about the situation to her. And I said, I don't need you to say anything. And that's it. We're done. It's over. Let's go. And we went and got a cake and walked home. But just being able to just let that bit out of me in that moment, in what I then knew to be a much safer space to do. Like, I felt safe to do that. He was just say, like, I need to shout at you. And then I didn't shout at her, but like I was able to just express what I was feeling. And instantly, that was it. All the pressure was gone. I felt better. I don't really remember much difference to her, in all honesty. She's got her own bag. And then we just carried on with the day. The space to be able to say what you think and feel good about it. It makes such a difference.
Having a passive-aggressive response, in my opinion, it's so common. I know for me, as like a recovering people pleaser, I think it was embedded in there. In like when I was learning, I learned very young that it wasn't safe to express myself, and that anger wasn't accepted. Like, anger wasn't an accepted response. And with my kids, I'm constantly verbalizing, it's okay to be angry, but we need to find outlets, and coming up with these different things, because I think that's where passive aggressive behavior really stems from, is this lack of safety in verbalizing that anger or frustration. And that comes from the past relationships that you expressed your anger and it wasn't accepted and it wasn't okay. But that passive aggressive behavior, it's hard on them. It's hard. And I just feel like it just sits in me so terribly.
Awful feeling.
Like it's like a different kind of weight. And now when I'm even around it, I'm like, can't do it. You're being passive aggressive. If you want to talk about it, we can hang out. And the amount of times I still lean towards it. Like, I'll be in a rotten mood and I'll put something down aggressively. And then I'll be like, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm going to go flow, or I'm going to go get this energy out somewhere else. And it's such a hard thing to like start doing, but that passive aggressive behavior.
Oh, and it is, like you say, it's inbuilt, or it feels like it. Obviously, it's a learned behavior. Like you say,
Yeah.
at some point in life, you felt it's not safe to express. And that could have been in the home, it could have been at school, it could have been, who knows where, it could be lots of different places. Maybe it's just societal messaging, maybe it's in the church, maybe it's in whatever. So many different places where it could exist. And then, of course, it's reinforced and reinforced. Do you think about a young child? Children are not passive aggressive, they're just aggressive.
Yeah.
So like, is it a 2-year-old? It's like the most aggressive that any human being is likely to be at any point in their life. And then between the ages of 2 and 4, they become socialized. That's the period of which they become socialized. And then I think the stats show that if at the age of 4, they're still in this really aggressive state, they're not being socialized properly, there's a much higher probability that they will then go on to maybe have a life that involves prison and crime and other challenges. It's not, again, not guaranteed, but it significantly increases the probability. And like in those cases, that really is a case of it's not safe to emote. But even beyond that, even as you then grow up and go through your older years and you go into school and you have to conform. And I'm not saying that there aren't strengths in that, of course, but sometimes it is basically do as you're told and don't do anything except that. Before you know it, you're building up this resentment. Every single time that happens, it's resentment. And that passive aggressiveness is just like one token of resentment just being ejected at a time. It's almost like you can always justify it because I'm not losing my shit. I'm not shouting and screaming. I'm just making a sarcastic comment, just saying something under my breath. I'm just rolling my eyes. I'm just slamming the fridge door. I'm just aggressively putting my shoes on. It's like all of these things. And it's just, it's almost like, in a way, it's a little gaslighting. I'm not really angry, but I am.
I'm not really angry, but everybody in the vicinity understands
know about it.
what it is that I'm feeling. But because I'm not doing anything directly, and I think that's where confusion comes with emotional abuse, because that behavior really is abusive to the people around you, because they're seeing one thing and they're feeling another.
Yeah.
They're seeing you in a calm state, but they're feeling your anger and frustration, and nobody's talking about it. And that's where it gets confusing, because you're like, well, he doesn't hit me, but he punches the wall once every 6 months. It's so ingrained for our own safety to logic your way out of it, logic your way out of how that person's making you feel. Over time, it won't sit well in your body.
No. Talking about what sits well, you think about this story that we've read out, like how does it feel for you? Like, where does it sit with you as the reader or as the listener?
For me, I see a huge reflection, because my infidelity experience was so early in my marriage. And so I very much am currently living that reality of I'm not with either. Neither the one relationship damaged the trust, but it didn't cause the separation. Our response to each other over time, the quality of the years over the quantity of the years, is what we had to sit down with and really look at. And so I'm like, I love the optimism. They both remarried. They both found a groove. And I think it's so common to just find yourself pulled in both directions and freeze. Because in my situation, if I could have stepped away from the individuals and I could have acknowledged myself and my own desires, I would have seen that I needed to leave both relationships. But because I felt like I had to pick one, it caused me to freeze and be like, well, I'm in a marriage. I'm going to lock in. I'm going to invest in it. I'm going to fix it. I at that time felt more secure in repairing a relationship than And I also remember very much feeling like I was coming from a place of my masculine, of when I tell him that I cheated, then the relationship will be over and I can walk away as the horrible person. And I think when that wasn't the reaction, it caused another form of freeze.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's not easy, but the amount of self-digging that it has caused me to have to do makes me feel so much more prepared to enter into a future relationship, because I've learned so much about myself in the experience, and so much more about the importance of questioning your needs and not the relationship's needs. And once you can move forward with that, losing the affair partner, it becomes less detrimental. Because once you're moving forward with the divorce for yourself and it's not for somebody else and you're not questioning that, for me, that's where I found peace, to finally start making those moves.
Yeah.
I can totally empathize with the frozen between the two and then ultimately ending up in an unforeseen situation.
Yeah. I think that for me, there's an element of curiosity. I'd love to know what he was able to take from what he learned in both of the relationships that he's now taken, because he's saying that he's remarried, to see how he's taken what he's learned from those and how that's impacted his marriage going forward. And that'd be really interesting to learn and understand. So I would like that element of curiosity that hangs over every story I read and think about. But yeah.
Well, we did reach out and offer that if he wants to be on the podcast. So maybe you'll get your answers.
Maybe. Like that very much.
All right.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Yeah. And for all the listeners still here, thank you for sticking with us. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.